When I think about Plato, I gently drift back to my years at Hamilton Holt, when I was filled with wonder each time I learned about a new philosophical giant. I had this incredible philosophy teacher, Professor Robbins. As the school updated its facilities, they went from chalkboards to dry eraser marker boards. When I attended his classes, there was only one remaining room on campus with a chalkboard. Professor Robbins would only teach in that classroom. For him, there was something sterile about the dry eraser marker boards, as if history and philosophy and even philosophers themselves could only be portrayed accurately amongst billows of chalk dust and the inevitable furrowed brows of his students. They seemed to have a furrowed brow etched into their foreheads. He would walk around as he lectured, lost in the experience, as if he imagined himself walking along the streets of Athens herself. He was our tour guide, and each trek through a philosophical work was another adventure. He spoke with such enthusiasm during each and every lecture, so much so that I often remained on the edge of my seat. I couldn't help myself, as I inevitably got caught up in his passion for the past every single lecture. As he'd take our classroom through musings from those long past, he'd wipe the chalk dust on his pants and repeatedly push his glasses up on his nose. For me, Plato, Socrates, and so many others are etched in my memory alongside billows of chalk dust and spectacles sliding to the edge of one's nose. There will be no billows of chalk dust today, but we will journey through Plato's ideas of a just society. The thoughts of this towering philosophical figure shaped the beginnings of the world's ideas in various fields and expertise. Indeed, their words still shape ideas today, building new ideas. This morning, we will explore a small part of one of Plato's ideas, gently weaving in a few of the principles that we all hold so dear. Let's begin our journey with Plato's allegory of the cave. For our purposes today, we will present the allegory as our story of all ages.
Hi, my name is Deanna Leary, and this is an abridged version of the Plato allegory of the caves. I'm going to start over. Hi, my name is Deanna Leary, and this is an abridged version of Plato's allegory of the cave. Imagine a cave in which there are three prisoners. The prisoners are tied to some rocks. Their arms and legs are bound, and their head is tied so that they cannot look at anything but the stone wall that is in front of them. These prisoners have been here since childhood and have never been or seen outside of the cave. Behind the prisoners is a fire. Between each of the captives is a raised walkway. People outside the cave walk along this walkway, carrying things on their head, including animals, plants, wood, and stone. The prisoners cannot look at anything behind, to the left or to the right of them. When people walk along the walkway, they can see shadows of the objects that they are carrying cast onto the wall. Plato suggests that the prisoners would begin a game of guessing which shadow would appear next. If one of the prisoners were to guess correctly, the others would praise him as clever and say that he was a master of nature. One of the prisoners then escapes from their bindings and leaves the cave. He is shocked at the world he discovers outside of the cave and does not believe it can be real. As he becomes used to his new surroundings, he realizes that his former experiences or view of reality was wrong. He begins to understand his new world and sees that the sun is the source of life and goes on an intellectual journey where he discovers beauty and meaning. He sees that his former life and the guessing game they played is useless. The former prisoner returns to the cave to inform the other captives of his findings. They do not believe him and threaten to kill him if he tries to set them free. If you had never seen the world outside of the cave, then you would believe that the shadows of objects were real.
Plato believed that the physical world around us is not real, that it is constantly changing, and thus you can never really say what real is. There is a world of ideas, which is the world of unchanging and absolute truth. This is the reality for Plato. Professor of philosophy Dr. Philip A. Pecorino put it best when he wrote, "Does such a world exist independent of human minds?" Plato believed that it did, and that whenever we grasp an idea or see something with our mind's eyes, we are using our mind to conceive of something in the ideal world. According to Plato, there are a number of proofs of this ideal world. The concept of geometry, such as the concept of a circle, which is a line equidistant from a point, is something which does not exist in the physical world. All physical circles, such as wheels, drawings, etc., are not perfectly round. Yet our mind has the concept of a perfect circle. Since this concept could not come from the physical world, it must be from an ideal world. He believed another piece of proof is moral perfection. We can conceive of a morally perfect person, even though the people we know around us are not morally perfect. So, where does someone get the idea of moral perfection? Since it could not be obtained from the world around us, it must have come from an ideal world. Platonism has been an extremely influential philosophy throughout the ages. The Republic's famous allegory of the cave, which suggests that people's ordinary sense of reality may be illusory, continues to shape our cultural imagination. It has been revisited again and again in literature, as well as in classic sci-fi films. In the 1999 blockbuster movie The Matrix, our hero Neo, played by Keanu Reeves, is presented with a choice between a sense-based perception of reality and the reality that he, intellectually speaking, knows to be true. In philosophical terms, this metaphysical and metaphorical choice most easily applies to Plato's theory of forms. I believe it also applies to the fourth and seventh Unitarian Universalist principles, which are as follows: a free and responsible search for truth and meaning and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Plato wrote that it was the task of the enlightened not only to ascend to learning and to see the good, but to be willing to descend again to those prisoners and to share their troubles and honors, whether they are worth having or not. And this they must do even with the prospect of death. For me, plucking any quote from Plato's Republic warms my nerdy soul. And this stated quote itself is bathed in the essence of both the aforementioned principles. We are absolutely interconnected, just as our beloved seventh principle states. This piece of literature is one of the most iconic philosophical works in history. The cave allegory utilizes the Platonic dialogue, whereby questions are asked and answered to stimulate critical thinking. This method draws out ideas and shines a light on underlying presumptions. Such works are called Socratic dialogues because Plato consistently uses his teacher, Socrates, as a character. I always love that because of the adage, we write what we know. He used these dialogues to argue that the material world is changeable and therefore unreliable. He did not believe that the world of appearances itself was at all definitive. Like many philosophers, he questioned the world around him. When doing so, one of the things he discovered was patterns. Where so many mathematicians, scientists, and physicists would study patterns, Plato explored patterns in human nature and within human society itself. In an effort to understand the nature of humankind, and indeed nature itself, he found that the world of appearances was wholly inconsistent, terming a more real or permanent world as the world of forms. In this book, a group of philosophers decide to create an imaginary city in an effort to define what justice looks like by the act of reasoning through ideas on the subject of justice. They discuss the meaning of justice by laying out different parameters, then debating them. This work approaches the idea from human psychology rather than a decision made based solely upon perception or experiential data alone. It also explores the effect of education and the lack of it in our nature, subtly speaking on the lack of education in Athenian society herself. Plato's strategy in the Republic is first to analyze the primary notion of societal or political justice and then to derive a concept of individual justice. Although Socrates was both his teacher and muse and extremely well regarded in his time, Socratic writings were not recorded, or perhaps their existence was removed by the Athenian government. Either way, most of the knowledge about Socrates' life, beliefs, and works are etched into life by the works of his contemporaries. It is the early work of Plato where we find most of our information about Socrates, including the particulars on Socrates' trials in Plato's work titled Apologies. Indeed, all who have come before us created works, scientific theories, artistic and social growth by standing upon the shoulders of giants, an adaptation of Isaac Newton's quote. Plato reached further by building upon Socrates' idea. However, Socrates also questioned the very idea of a teacher's ability to impart knowledge. Ultimately, Plato reached forth to create a school based in part upon the ideas learned and gained from Pythagoras, who encouraged him to create his academy in Athens, eventually allowing other thinkers such as Aristotle to learn and grow. I could speak Sundays upon Sundays on the subject of Plato's theories of form, relating to the Unitarian Universalist principles specifically, in part because Plato was an idealist who ultimately believed that everything and everyone had an ideal form. It is my belief that UUs can connect with this with fair ease, as each of us strive to become the very best version of ourselves. The piece discusses the meaning of equity and whether the just man is happier than the unjust man. Admittedly, I absolutely love the fact that Plato utilized his works to make a political statement on Athenian society herself. Quite unsurprising that that very society voted to execute his mentor, Socrates. Plato's strategy in the Republic is first to develop the primary notion of societal or political justice, and then to derive a similar concept of individual justice, as said before. This references UU's fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and whispers of our fifth principles, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Most experts agree that Plato's theory of forms asserts that the physical realm is only a shadow or image of true reality. Let's take a few moments for a short interactive exercise. In an effort to gain a more clear understanding of Plato's concept of forms, I'd like each of us to grab a piece of paper and something to write with and draw a line. Author Toman Drake wrote that in the allegory of the cave, what we see in the physical world compared to the true intelligible knowledge is like shadows compared to the reality outside of the cave. But even when this reality is a mere shadow of the sun itself. With this exercise, we illustrate Plato's idea of the nature of belief versus knowledge. Each of our drawings will have a line that is different lengths. Some of us will have used pencils. Some of us will have used pens. Perhaps one or two chose a marker. For those who used a pen or a marker, the color of the line drawn will differ. The line that I draw will inevitably be different from yours. However, according to Plato, the line itself is unchanging. Its makeup is consistent, therefore it is real. Although our perceptions of what a line looks like differs, the reality or form of the line itself is consistent. There are countless lines in the world, but the form of lineness, if you will, is at its core. It is the essence of all of them. This concept can admittedly be a bit abstract. Another way to look at this is through the eyes of modern cinema. As we saw earlier in the clip from the movie The Matrix, it is also apparent in the movie The Truman Show. A few examples are the symbology of the light and fire, the shadows, the cave itself, and the breaking of chains by the prisoner. In the movie, the character Truman explores the metaphysical questions about what is real and what is not real. In The Matrix, the main character Neo is trapped in a false reality, while in the movie, the fake world is created by machines that have taken over the earth. Some fundamental similarities still occur. Both Neo and Plato's freed prisoners must look deeply at the difference between what is real and what is not, ultimately having to accept the truth before being afforded the chance to delve deeply into the fundamental truths of the world that can be explored. This can only occur by exiting the cave. In both of these cinematic examples, a great power controls the character's perception before they break free into the world of reality, or before, if you will, they are able to exit the cave. As with these movies, Plato, through this dialogue, asserts that reliable knowledge is only gained by those who can conceive of a true form. In this particular dialogue, when he speaks first of the just human being, then of the just society, there are parts of the society he speaks of through this dialogue that do not snugly fit in with today's ideologies, which is entirely understandable as time changes all things, including societal perceptions. However, such dialogues allowed many for years to come to utilize his work as a basic foundation from which to spring off exploring their own theories. Bringing us right back to Isaac Newton's quote, "They saw further by standing on the shoulders of giants," or in this case, a giant. For example, Martin Luther King Jr. said that the Republic was one book he'd take with him to himself to a deserted island alongside the Bible. Many additional amazing individuals who opened the world's eyes to major scientific growth, such as Copernicus, whose observations of the heavens for patterns made giant strides in the mathematical and scientific growth for humankind. Platonic theory provided a foothold from which to look further into that final frontier, the unknown. There were also artists such as Matisse who realized that all things in nature could be broken down into geometric shapes, stating, "I do not literally paint the table, but the emotion it produces upon me." Or those such as Pablo Picasso and George Braque, who brought Matisse's original vision to an entirely new type of art with Cubism. Indeed, Plato touched the world for centuries to come with his belief that the form or idea of a drawing of a line, for example, will depend entirely upon our perception of what is possible through growth. Growth of philosophical, scientific, spiritual, and evolutionary ideas and theories. I am not sure that any of us could have seen the perfect line, but that does not mean it does not exist in the truth of form. For as long as we can conceive of that line, it must exist. It must exist. And ever more wonderful is that as you use, we will grow together as we reach to understand that perfect line. As you use, we remain open. Therefore, we are able to adjust our intellectual and spiritual enlightenment throughout our learning process. Although we are all different beings on adjacent paths growing together. Tim spoke a while back about a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. When we share our ideas, that exchange during our summer sharing series and in our coffee hours after each Sunday service, we are experiencing our version of Plato's intellectual discourse, philosophers each, sometimes teaching one another and sometimes learning from one another. Plato said, anyone who has common sense will remember that the bewilderments of the eyes are of two kinds and arise from two causes, either from coming out of the light or from going into the light. We seek enlightenment both through intellectual exploration and spiritual growth, essentially seeking Plato's light, that sunlight the freed prisoner found outside the cave. When the freed prisoner returned to the cave, the character acted from a belief that every single person in that cave had inherent worth and dignity. When he reached out his hand in an effort to release them from their chains, he did so with compassion, believing that justice and equity were requirements for a just man. When he, in Plato's own words that began this service, took on the task of enlightening not only to ascend to the learned and to see the good, but to be willing to descend again to those prisoners and share their troubles and their honors, whether they are worth having or not. He was accepting them as he listened and connected with each of their individual plights while in the chains. He was encouraging growth. And in doing so, he admirably offered respect for the very interdependent web in which they all lived, in which we are all a part. As Mosaicans specifically, we do the same thing each and every day through the work of our hands, hearts, and minds. Doing so allows us to transform both our lives and the lives around us through compassion, service, generosity, and respectful relationships. We also use the same process in the wider world with the same goal. Out of this love and respect, a meaningful life does indeed emerge. We are ever together. As you leave our sacred space today, remember that as you use the different dialogues themselves, help us to form our beloved mosaic, a gift we are all deeply appreciative for each and every day. Thank you all so much for sharing your time with me this morning and for patiently listening to me as I prattle on with love about one of the history's most powerful thinkers. Amen and blessed be.